They made him hand over his visitor badge and told him to wait outside the glass doors like he didn't belong in the building where his wife had just been rushed into emergency surgery. The hallway on the 7th floor of St. Catherine Medical Center smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too unforgiving. Daniel Whitaker stood near the wall coat, still on hands, clenched at his sides, listening to muffled voices behind the frosted glass of the surgical wing. Somewhere in there, his wife Eleanor was unconscious on a steel table, and he was being treated like an inconvenience. Daniel was 61 years old, grey at the temples, spine straight from decades of habit. He wore a simple navy jacket, the kind you buy because it lasts, not because it impresses. His shoes were clean but scuffed. His watch was old, real old, gold worn thin at the edges, the kind of watch a man keeps because it reminds him who he used to be. Across the hall, Eleanor's younger sister, Vivian Parker, stood with her arms crossed, heels planted like she owned the place. Her pearl necklace caught the light every time she shifted. She didn't look at Daniel when she spoke. She spoke to the nurse instead, voice crisp-controlled, just loud enough to be heard. "He's not immediate family on the medical paperwork," Vivian said, "and frankly, he's upsetting my mother." Daniel turned his head slowly. His eyes were calm. Too calm. "I'm her husband," he said. His voice was steady, but there was steel under it. "We've been married 37 years, Vivian finally looked at him then. Her lips tightened. Not in anger, in embarrassment. "This isn't about marriage, Daniel. It's about protocols, liability. You understand how hospitals work." He did understand. He understood exactly how places like this worked. He also understood how people like Vivian worked. People who smiled at fundraisers. People who said the word protocol when they meant status. Behind Vivian, her mother, Margaret Parker, sat rigid in a vinyl chair, clutching her designer purse like a shield. 78 years old. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. She stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge Daniel's presence, as if ignoring him could erase decades of shared holidays, shared silences, shared contempt. The nurse hesitated. Young. Tired. Torn between empathy and instruction. "So maybe it would be best if you stepped back for now, just until the surgery is over." Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. The air felt heavy, pressurized, like the moments before a storm breaks. He took one step back, then another, until his shoulder brushed the cold wall. "Fine," he said. One word. Flat. Controlled. Vivian nodded, satisfied. She leaned closer to her mother, lowering her voice, but not enough. "I told you this would happen. He doesn't know how to stay in his lane." Margaret's fingers tightened around the purse strap. "I never understood why Eleanor married beneath herself," she murmured, "especially after everything we gave her." Daniel heard every word. He stared at the floor tiles, each one cracked just slightly differently, and felt something old stir in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something sharper, the memory of being underestimated. Again, and again, and again. He thought of the call he'd taken in the parking garage less than an hour earlier. The one he hadn't answered right away, because Eleanor had been clutching her chest, gasping eyes wide with fear. The one that kept vibrating in his pocket even now. He didn't check his phone. The doors to the surgical wing swung open. A doctor stepped out, mask pulled down around his neck, eyes scanning the hallway. Mrs. Parker family Vivian surged forward. "Here, I'm her sister. This is our mother." The doctor nodded, already speaking. The procedure is more complicated than we initially thought. There was internal bleeding we didn't see on the first scan. We're stabilizing her now, but we may need to make some decisions quickly." Margaret stood face pale. "What kind of decisions consent-related?" the doctor said carefully. "If things escalate." Vivian turned eyes, flicking toward Daniel for half a second. Just a flicker. Then she looked back at the doctor. "We'll handle it." Daniel stepped forward before he could stop himself. "I'm her legal spouse. Any consent goes through me." The hallway went silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Vivian laughed. A short, sharp sound. "You handle what, Daniel? You can barely handle your own life. This is a medical emergency, not one of your little principles." Margaret finally faced him fully. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, dismissive. "Daniel, this is not the time to play husband. Let the people who understand these things take care of it." He looked at them both, really looked. The lines around Margaret's mouth, the tension in Vivian's jaw, the way neither of them asked how Eleanor was feeling, only how this would look, how it would affect them. "I am taking care of it," Daniel said quietly. The doctor cleared his throat. "Sir, do you have the paperwork to prove spousal consent?" Daniel reached into his jacket slowly. His hand didn't shake. He pulled out his wallet, worn leather edges, soft from years of use. He slid out a folded document and handed it over. The doctor glanced at it, then looked again. His brow furrowed. "This is current." Vivian scoffed. "Of course it is. He probably carries it around like a security blanket." The doctor didn't respond. He studied the document longer than necessary. Then he looked up at Daniel with a different expression. Less dismissive. More curious. "I'll need to make a call," the doctor said, "just to confirm something." He walked away. Vivian's smile faltered. "What is that supposed to mean?" Daniel said nothing. He leaned back against the wall again, folding his arms. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. But it was getting close. Margaret shook her head. "You always did this," she said softly. Lurked, watched, made people uncomfortable without ever saying anything useful. Daniel met her gaze. "You mistake silence for absence," he said. "I've been here the whole time." She looked away first. Down the hall, hurried footsteps echoed. A man in a dark suit appeared, hospital ID clipped to his lapel, phone still in his hand. He scanned the group, then locked eyes with Daniel. His posture changed instantly. "Mr. Whitaker," the man said, breathless. "I've been trying to reach you." Vivian turned sharply. "Excuse me, who are you?" The man didn't look at her. "Hospital administration," he said. Then to Daniel. Quieter. "There's been a situation. We need to speak privately." Daniel pushed off the wall and straightened his jacket. He nodded once. "After my wife is stable." The administrator swallowed. "Yes, sir." Vivian stared between them, confusion flickering across her face for the first time. "Sir," she repeated. "What is this?" Daniel glanced at her. Just a glance. No triumph, no smile, only something unreadable. "It's exactly what you think it isn't," he said. And for the first time since the ambulance sirens had cut through the night, the Parker family felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The administrator led Daniel down a side corridor that smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper, away from the surgical wing and the Parker family's sharp whispers. Daniel walked at an even pace, his shoes barely making a sound against the polished tile. He could feel Vivian's eyes burning into his back, could almost hear the questions stacking up in her mind. But he didn't turn around. Not yet. They stopped in a small consultation room, with a narrow window overlooking the ambulance bay. Red lights flashed below as another stretcher rolled in. The administrator closed the door carefully, as if sealing something fragile inside. "I'm sorry about the timing," the man said. He was in his late 40s, hair-thinning tie loosened. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. "My name is Thomas Reed, Chief Operations Officer for the hospital network." Daniel nodded once. "You said there was a situation." Reed hesitated, then glanced at his phone, as if expecting it to buzz again. "We received a call from legal about 40 minutes ago. A hold request. Priority level 1. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I told them to wait until surgery was underway." Reed's eyebrows lifted. "Just slightly." "Yes, sir. They mentioned that. Still, when something like that comes in, we're required to notify you immediately." Daniel stepped closer to the window, watching the paramedics below move with rehearsed urgency. "Is my wife stable?" "They're controlling the bleeding," Reed said quickly. "Dr. Kaplan is one of our best. If anyone can get her through this, it's him." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second. 37 years of shared mornings and quiet evenings pressed in on him. Eleanor's laugh, her stubbornness, the way she always hummed when she cooked, even when she was upset. He opened his eyes again. "Then focus on that," he said. "Everything else can wait." Reed shifted his weight. "The thing is, sir, the hold request isn't just about administrative concerns. It affects our entire cardiac wing." Daniel turned. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "Explain." Reed swallowed. "There's an internal review underway. Procurement contracts, equipment sourcing, donations that were redirected." Daniel's jaw tightened. Not in surprise. In recognition. "How long longer than we'd like," Reed admitted. "Some of the board members are nervous. Very nervous." Daniel let out a short breath. "Good." They should be. Outside the room, raised voices spilled down the hallway. Vivian again, sharp, insistent. Margaret's lower, trembling with outrage. Daniel could picture them perfectly without seeing them. He'd been picturing them for decades. Reed lowered his voice. "They don't know, do they?" Daniel shook his head. "No. And they won't. Not yet." Reed nodded, relief crossing his face. "Understood. But they're demanding to speak to someone in charge. They're calling donors, threatening to pool support." Daniel's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let them." Reed hesitated, then said what he'd clearly been holding back. "Mr. Whitaker, with respect, if they escalate this publicly, it could get messy." Daniel met his eyes. Messy for whom Reed didn't answer. Daniel turned back to the window. The ambulance doors closed. Sirens faded. "Thomas," he said quietly, using the man's first name for the first time, "when Eleanor comes out of surgery, I want her transferred to a private recovery room. Top floor. No visitors except medical staff until I say otherwise." Reed nodded immediately. "Already arranged, and I want a full report on the procurement issue by morning. Names, dates, signatures." "Yes, sir." Daniel finally looked at him again. "One more thing. The Parker family stays exactly where they are. No special treatment, no briefings, no reassurance." Reed hesitated. "They won't like that." Daniel's voice dropped calm and absolute. "They don't have to." A knock sounded at the door. A nurse peeked in, eyes flicking nervously between the two men. "Dr. Kaplan is asking for Mr. Whitaker." Daniel straightened. "I'm coming." As he stepped back into the hallway, the noise hit him like a wave. Vivian pacing. Margaret arguing with a junior administrator who looked seconds away from tears. Their conversation stopped the moment they saw Daniel. "There you are," Vivian snapped. What was that about? Who was that man? Daniel didn't slow down. Someone doing his job. Margaret stepped into his path. "Daniel, this is serious. Eleanor is in surgery, and you're off having secret meetings. This is not appropriate." He stopped then. Slowly, he looked at Margaret the way one looks at a stranger who has just spoken too loudly in a quiet room. "What's not appropriate," he said, "is turning a medical crisis into a power struggle." Vivian scoffed. "Oh, please. You wouldn't know power if Dr. Kaplan appeared at the end of the corridor pulling off his gloves." His face was grave, but controlled. Mr. Whittaker Daniel moved past Margaret without touching her. "How is she?" "We stopped the bleeding," Kaplan said. "She's stable, but the next 24 hours are critical. We'll know more soon." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." Kaplan hesitated, then added, "We'll need to discuss post-operative care." "There are options. I'm available," Daniel said. "Any time." Vivian stepped forward. "Doctor, I'm her sister. I need to know what's going on." Kaplan glanced at Daniel, a question in his eyes. Daniel shook his head once. Subtle. Final. Kaplan turned back to Vivian. "The medical team will provide updates through the proper channels." Margaret's voice cracked. "This is unbelievable." Daniel watched their faces change, confusion giving way to something else. Unease, the first hairline fracture in their certainty. As Kaplan walked away, Daniel felt his phone vibrate again. He checked it this time. One message, short, direct, board meeting confirmed, emergency session. Tonight. He slid the phone back into his pocket. Vivian stared at him. "You're enjoying this," she accused. Daniel looked at her. Really looked. The impatience in her posture, the entitlement she wore like perfume. "No," he said. "I'm enduring it. There's a difference." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "What have you done?" Daniel didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the elevator at the end of the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last, but his shoulders stayed square. Inside the elevator, the doors slid shut with a soft, mechanical sigh. Daniel leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on him. Eleanor. The hospital. The mess he'd been trying to keep contained for years. He thought of the first time he'd met Margaret Parker. The way she'd smiled without warmth. The way she'd asked what he did for a living, and then nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. He thought of the dinners where his words had been ignored, the decisions made around him, not with him. The elevator chimed. When the doors opened, Daniel stepped out onto the top floor where the air was quieter, the carpet thicker, the lighting softer. A private waiting area stretched ahead, empty for now. Behind him, several floors below the Parker family, stood in a hallway they no longer controlled, beginning to realize that the man they had spent decades dismissing was not lost, not small, and not powerless at all. The boardroom overlooked the city like a watchtower, glass walls reflecting the orange smear of sunset across Manhattan. Daniel Whittaker stood at the head of the table alone, hands resting on the polished wood, listening to the low murmur of voices gathering outside the door. He had not sat down. He rarely did when something important was about to begin. The door opened and they filed in, one by one. Men and women in their late 50s and 60s, expensive suits, careful smiles, people accustomed to being deferred to. They greeted Daniel with nods that hovered between respect and uncertainty, as if they were still recalibrating where he belonged in the room. "Let's get started," Daniel said before anyone could speak. His voice was calm, unhurried, carrying easily through the space. A few of them exchanged glances. One man cleared his throat. "Daniel, perhaps we should wait until everyone is present." "They are," Daniel replied. He tapped the table once, not hard, just enough to anchor the moment. Anyone who chose not to attend tonight made a decision. They'll live with it. Silence followed. Then chairs scraped softly as they sat. Daniel moved to the window, looking down at the city he had learned to navigate without ever announcing himself. 3 hours ago, he said, my wife was taken into emergency surgery in one of our hospitals. While surgeons worked to save her life, members of this board attempted to leverage that moment for influence. A woman near the end of the table stiffened. "That's not entirely fair." Daniel turned, his gaze locked onto hers. "Isn't it?" No one answered. He continued. "For years, this network has relied on a reputation built on trust. Community trust, donor trust, patient trust. Tonight, I was informed that certain procurement contracts were routed through shell vendors, that donations earmarked for cardiac equipment were delayed, redirected, or quietly replaced with cheaper alternatives." A man across the table leaned forward. "We've already commissioned an internal audit." Daniel nodded. "I know, I ordered it." That landed. The man's mouth opened, then closed again. Daniel walked back to the table and placed a thin folder in front of him. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about exposure. You all know what happens when hospitals lose public trust. Lawsuits, federal oversight, careers ending not with applause but subpoenas." A low ripple of unease moved through the room. "One of you," Daniel went on, "called my wife's family tonight and suggested that if certain privileges were restored, this issue might be smoothed over." He let that sit. "I want to be very clear," he said. "There are no privileges. There is no smoothing. There is only correction." The door at the far end opened quietly. Thomas Reed stepped in and took a seat against the wall, tablet in hand. His presence was a signal. This meeting was not theoretical. Daniel folded his hands. "Effective immediately, procurement authority is suspended pending review. All contracts signed in the past 18 months will be re-examined." "Voluntarily." A man near the window scoffed. "You don't have the unilateral authority to—" Daniel cut him off with a look. Not sharp, measured. "I do." The man froze. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You seem to have forgotten something," he said. "This network exists because someone chose to fund it, quietly, consistently, and without asking for their name on the building. The room went very still. That someone," Daniel continued, "was me." A woman inhaled sharply. Another shifted in her chair. "That's not accurate," someone said weakly. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed a single document on the table. Not a stack. Not a binder. 1 page. He slid it forward. "Check the signature," he said. No one moved at first. Then the woman nearest picked it up. Her hands trembled as her eyes scanned the page. She passed it down the table without a word. As it made its way around, faces changed, color drained, eyes widened. One man swallowed hard. Daniel straightened. "For 28 years, I've funded this network under a trust that predates most of your appointments. I stayed invisible because I believed good work didn't need an audience. Tonight that changes. The last person set the paper down as if it were heavy." "So yes," Daniel said softly, "I have the authority." Silence pressed in. Thick. Heavy. Thomas Reed cleared his throat. "The review will begin at first light," he said. "Full cooperation is expected." Daniel nodded once. "Good." He stepped back from the table. "I'm done here. You'll receive further instructions in writing." As he turned toward the door, someone spoke, a man with silver hair, voice low. "Daniel, we had no idea." Daniel paused, hand on the doorframe. He looked back over his shoulder. That he said was the problem. He left them there. The elevator ride down was quiet. Daniel watched the numbers descend each floor, carrying him closer to Eleanor. His chest tightened with every passing second. Control was one thing. Fear was another. He could manage systems. He could dismantle arrogance. He could not negotiate with uncertainty. When the doors opened on the recovery floor, the lighting was dimmer, softer. Machines hummed gently. A nurse greeted him with a nod and led him toward a private room. Eleanor lay still beneath crisp white sheets, a tangle of tubes and wires framing her pale face. Daniel stopped just inside the doorway. The sight of her like that struck him harder than any boardroom confrontation ever could. He pulled a chair close and sat, taking her hand, carefully mindful of the monitors. Her skin was warm. Real. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'm here," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "You don't have to be strong right now. I've got it." Outside the room, footsteps approached. Daniel didn't turn until he heard Vivian's voice, strained quieter than before. "We need to talk." He stood and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Vivian looked different now. The sharpness dulled. The confidence cracked. "What is happening?" she asked. "Everyone's acting like you're in charge," Daniel finished. She nodded. He studied her for a moment. Not unkindly. "I've always been in charge of my own life, Vivian," he said. "I just didn't announce it." Margaret appeared behind her face, lined with worry. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling. "If we've offended you." "You have," Daniel said. Simply. "For decades." Margaret flinched. "But this isn't about offense," he continued. "It's about boundaries. And those are being redrawn." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "Eleanor needs us." "She needs peace," Daniel said, "and she'll have it." He met their gazes one last time. "I'll update you when there's something to update." He turned and walked back into the room, closing the door gently behind him. The monitors continued their steady rhythm. Daniel sat again, holding Eleanor's hand, the weight of the night settling around him. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that lines had been crossed and power quietly reclaimed. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt the ground beneath his feet solid again. Morning came, slowly diluted by rain streaking down the windows like thin veins of mercury. Daniel sat in the chair beside Eleanor's bed, his jacket folded over the back, his tie loosened but still on. He had not slept. He hadn't needed to. Every beep of the monitor anchored him to the room, to the steady proof that she was still here. A nurse entered, quietly checked the IV, adjusted a line, then paused. "She squeezed your hand earlier," she said. "Just a little." "That's a good sign." Daniel nodded, eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Thank you." When the nurse left the room, felt smaller, more intimate. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You scared me," he said, not accusing, just honest. "You don't get to do that again." Her eyelids fluttered, barely perceptible. Or maybe he imagined it. He didn't care. He stayed. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He ignored it. Then again. He exhaled and checked the screen. 2 messages. One from Thomas Reed. One from an unfamiliar number with a Washington area code. Reed's was brief. Federal compliance team arriving this afternoon. Board in containment mode. The other message was shorter. "We need to talk. Today." Daniel stared at the second message longer. He knew that tone. Knew the restraint behind it. He typed a reply with his thumb. Afternoon. Hospital only. He slipped the phone away as footsteps approached. Not hurried. Deliberate. Margaret Parker appeared at the doorway alone this time. No pearls, no designer coat, just a beige cardigan pulled tight around her thin frame. "May I come in?" she asked. Daniel stood. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "This isn't the place." Margaret nodded, as if she'd expected that. They moved down the hall together, stopping near a window that overlooked the river grey and swollen from the rain. She clasped her hands. "I owe you an apology." Daniel waited. "I spent yours believing certain things," she continued. "About class, about who mattered, about what kind of man my daughter should have married." Her voice wavered. "I was wrong." Daniel studied her face. He saw fear there. Real fear. The kind that comes when control slips. "You weren't wrong," he said quietly. "You were consistent." Margaret flinched. "I don't understand." "You believed worth could be measured," Daniel said. "By titles, by circles, by access. I never fit your measurements." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Eleanor is my daughter, and she's my wife," Daniel replied, "which means her well-being comes before your comfort." Margaret nodded slowly. "What do you want from us?" Daniel considered the question. "Nothing," he said. "That's the point." She looked at him, then really looked as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You're not angry?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm finished." Margaret's shoulders sagged. She turned and walked away without another word. By early afternoon, the hospital felt different. Quieter in some ways, taut in others. Men in dark suits moved through corridors with practiced anonymity. Federal compliance badges flashed briefly, then disappeared into jackets. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Daniel watched it all from Eleanor's room, detached but aware. He took a call from Reed, gave 3 instructions, ended it in under a minute. Control without noise, power without display. The Washington number called again. Daniel stepped into an empty conference room and answered. Daniel Whitaker. "Mr. Whitaker," a woman's voice said. Calm. Precise. "My name is Laura Hensley, Office of the Inspector General. I know who you are," Daniel said. A pause, then a faint smile in her tone. "I assumed you might." "We can speak here," Daniel continued. "I'm not leaving the hospital." "That's fine," Hensley said. "This won't take long. We've been circling certain irregularities for years. Your cooperation accelerated the timeline." "I didn't do it to accelerate anything," Daniel said. "I did it to stop it." Intent noted, Hensley replied. "There's something else, a separate matter." Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. "Go on." "Your name came up in a sealed deposition from 2 decades ago," she said. "A case involving a regional medical supplier. Fraud. Kickbacks. It was buried." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Memory surfaced. A younger man. A different city. A choice made quietly at cost. "Yes," he said. "I remember. You were listed as a witness," Hensley continued. "But you never testified. I was advised not to," Daniel said. And I listened. Another pause. Longer this time. "If we reopen that case, Hensley said your testimony would matter." Daniel opened his eyes. "Then reopen it." "You understand what that might trigger?" she said. "I understand exactly what it will trigger," Daniel replied. "That's why I'm agreeing." Silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. "Very well," Hensley said, finally. "We'll be in touch." The call ended. Daniel sat alone for a moment, staring at the blank wall. The past had a way of circling back when you stopped running from it. He stood and returned to Eleanor's room. She was awake. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, but open. She turned her head slightly when he approached. "You look terrible," she whispered. Relief hit him like a physical force. He laughed once, a short, breathless sound. "You should see yourself." She smiled faintly, then winced. "What happened?" she asked. "A lot," Daniel said. He took her hand again. "But nothing you need to worry about right now." She studied him even through the haze of medication. "You're different." "I'm tired," he said. "No," she murmured. "You're not shrinking." He didn't answer. Outside, voices rose. Vivian again, arguing with someone. A man's voice responded, firm, unyielding. Federal tone. Eleanor squeezed Daniel's hand weakly. "My family," she said. "I'm sorry." Daniel leaned close. "You don't have to apologize for other people's choices." Her eyes filled with tears. "I let them speak for me." Daniel's throat tightened. He chose his words carefully. "We'll talk about that later," he said. "When you're stronger." She nodded, exhausted. Her eyes drifted closed again. Daniel sat back, keeping his hand in hers. By evening, news alerts began lighting up phones across the city. Quiet investigations, administrative leave, pending reviews. No names yet. But the shape of the story was forming. Daniel ignored it all. He stayed where he was, watching Eleanor breathe, listening to the machines, holding steady while the world outside recalibrated around a truth it had overlooked for far too long. The first thing Daniel noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that followed disruption, when systems paused to reassess themselves. It hung over the hospital like a held breath. Even the elevators seemed to move more carefully, doors closing with softer resolve. Eleanor slept through most of the morning, her breathing steadier now, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Daniel sat beside her, reading nothing, thinking everything. He had lived his life in margins, in boardrooms, where his name never appeared on plaques, in conversations where he listened more than he spoke. That invisibility had once been a shield. Now it felt like a liability he was finally shedding. A knock came at the door. 2 measured taps. Thomas Reed stepped inside, closing it behind him. He looked exhausted, but there was something else in his expression. Respect sharpened by caution. "The compliance team has finished preliminary interviews," he said. "They're sealing records. IT systems are being mirrored." Daniel nodded. "Any resistance?" "Quiet panic," Reed said. "The most dangerous kind." Daniel glanced at Eleanor. "Keep it contained." Reed hesitated. "There's something else. The board wants to issue a statement." Daniel's eyes lifted. "Do they think it might calm donors?" Daniel stood slowly, careful not to disturb Eleanor. He moved to the window, watching the city come alive below. "Statements calm people who want reassurance," he said. "They don't calm people who want the truth delayed." Reed waited. "No statement," Daniel said. "Facts first, words later." Reed nodded and left. Minutes later, Vivian appeared again, this time alone. Her posture was different. Less rigid. Her voice, when she spoke, carried less edge. "She's awake," she said softly. "They told us." Daniel didn't turn. Briefly, Vivian swallowed. "Can I see her?" He considered, then shook his head. "Not today." Her eyes flashed, but she held it back. "You're punishing us." "No," Daniel said. "I'm protecting her." Vivian's shoulders slumped. "You don't trust us." Daniel finally faced her. "You've given me no reason to." She nodded once, accepting the truth in it. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About the hospital. About any of this." "I know," Daniel replied. "That doesn't change the damage." She left without another word. By midday, Eleanor stirred again. She looked clearer now, eyes focusing more deliberately. I heard voices, she said, arguing. Daniel smiled faintly. You're not missing much. She studied him. You always say that when something big is happening. He took her hand. Rest. She squeezed his fingers. Promise me something. Anything. Don't burn everything down just because you can. Daniel met her gaze. He saw the fear there, not of loss, but of isolation. I'm not burning anything, he said. I'm cleaning. She nodded, reassured enough to drift back to sleep. In the afternoon, Daniel took the elevator down to the administrative floor. The hallway outside the executive offices was lined with framed photographs, ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, smiling faces frozen in moments of accomplishment. Daniel walked past them without slowing. Inside the largest conference room, a smaller group waited. Not the full board, the inner circle, faces tight, hands folded. They stood when he entered. Sit, Daniel said. They did. One man spoke. This has escalated faster than anyone anticipated. Daniel took the seat at the head of the table. Escalation happens when pressure meets rot. Another voice defensive. We've served this community for decades, and you will continue to, Daniel said, if you're willing to let go of the parts that don't serve anyone but yourselves. A woman leaned forward. What do you want? Daniel looked at each of them in turn. Transparency, accountability, and one resignation. A murmur rippled through the room. The man at the far end stiffened. On what grounds? Daniel slid a folder across the table, thicker than the last. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Conflict of interest. Documented. Ongoing. The man's face drained of color. This is retaliation. Daniel's voice was even. This is consequence. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. I'll submit it, the man said, finally. His voice cracked, effective immediately. Daniel nodded. Good. When Daniel left the room, the city felt louder. News vans lined the curb outside the hospital. Reporters clustered like birds, sensing a change in weather. He slipped past them through a side exit, unseen. Back upstairs, Eleanor was awake again, sipping water. She smiled when she saw him. You look lighter, she said. I am, Daniel replied. He sat. But there's more coming. She sighed. I know. Later that evening, Laura Hensley arrived in person. No entourage, no drama. She shook Daniel's hand firmly. Thank you for agreeing to reopen the case, she said. Truth ages poorly in the dark, Daniel replied. Better to let it breathe. They spoke quietly in the conference room. Dates, names, threads connecting past and present. When she left, she carried more than documents. She carried momentum. As night fell, Daniel returned to Eleanor's side. The monitors beeped steadily. Outside the window, the city glowed, restless and alive. You're going to change things, Eleanor said softly. Daniel looked at her. We are. She smiled, then winced again. Just don't forget us. He leaned in, forehead resting against hers. Never. Outside the room, the hospital continued its careful recalibration. Inside, 2 lives steadied themselves amid the shift. Daniel stayed awake long after Eleanor slept, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, knowing that whatever came next would demand everything he had, and deciding without hesitation that it would be worth it. The headlines broke just after dawn, sliding across screens in quiet, careful language that barely masked the magnitude beneath. Administrative review launched. Procurement irregularities under federal oversight. Hospital network declines comment. Daniel read them on his phone while sitting beside Eleanor's bed, the light from the screen briefly reflecting in the glass of the window before he locked it and set it face down. Eleanor slept through it, her breathing slow, and even the lines of pain easing from her face for the first time in days. Daniel watched the rise and fall of her chest, grounding himself in the simple fact of her presence. Everything else could wait a few minutes longer. A soft knock came at the door. Not Reed this time. Daniel recognized the cadence before the door even opened. Daniel. The voice was low, familiar, worn smooth by years of controlled authority. He turned. Richard Hale stood in the doorway, raincoat folded over one arm, grey hair combed back with habitual precision. Former senator, long-time donor, a man who had learned how to survive storms by never appearing in the open when lightning struck. "You shouldn't be here," Daniel said. Hale stepped inside anyway, closing the door behind him. "I thought it was better to speak face to face before things harden." Daniel gestured to the chair opposite the bed. "You have 5 minutes." Hale sat glancing briefly at Eleanor, then back to Daniel. This didn't have to go this far. Daniel's jaw tightened. It went exactly as far as it needed to. Hale leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There are people above the board, above the network. People who don't appreciate surprises." Daniel met his gaze without blinking. "Then they should have appreciated honesty." Hale sighed. "You're not wrong, but you are disruptive." Daniel allowed himself a thin smile. Disruption is what happens when decay meets daylight. Hale studied him, searching for something. Fear, doubt, he found neither. "What do you want?" Daniel's voice remained calm. "For the hospital to serve patients, not egos. For donations to buy care, not influence. For Eleanor to wake up in a place that deserves her." Hale sat back. "You're asking people to surrender power they've held for decades." Daniel shrugged. "Power that can't survive scrutiny isn't power, it's leverage." The 5 minutes were up. Hale stood. "You've changed." Daniel shook his head. "No, I stopped waiting." Hale paused at the door. "If this turns political, you'll be dragged into it." Daniel didn't look away. "I've been dragged before." Hale left without another word. By mid-morning, Eleanor was fully awake, groggy but present. She watched Daniel pace the room while she sipped broth, her eyes following him with quiet curiosity. "You're circling," she said. He stopped. "Sorry. You do that when you're thinking too much." She shifted slightly. "Sit." He obeyed. She studied his face. "My mother came by earlier." Daniel stiffened. "I told them no visitors." "She didn't come in," Eleanor said gently. She stood in the hallway, cried, then left. Daniel looked down. "I didn't plan for that." Eleanor reached for his hand. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor spoke again. "Daniel, there's something you should know." He looked up. "I signed a power of attorney years ago," she said. "Back when my father died. I never updated it." Daniel's chest tightened. "In favor of my mother," Eleanor said quietly. At the time, it felt simpler. Daniel absorbed that. Slowly. "Does she still have it?" Eleanor nodded. "Legally?" "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "We'll fix it." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I want you to." That afternoon, Laura Hensley returned with 2 colleagues. They met in the small conference room, again blinds half drawn. This time the conversation was sharper, less cautious. "We've confirmed a pattern," Hensley said, sliding documents across the table. "Not just procurement, influence peddling, political favors, quiet pressure on regulators." Daniel skimmed the pages. "How far up?" "Far enough," she replied. "Which is why this won't be fast." Daniel nodded. "I'm not in a hurry." One of her colleagues leaned forward. "There's risk to you." Daniel met his eyes. "There's always risk." After they left, Daniel stood alone for a long moment, staring at the empty chairs. The cost of sunlight was always exposure. In the evening, Reed returned, tension etched into his face. Security flagged an incident, he said. Nothing physical. But your name is circulating. People are asking questions. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What kind about your funding? Reed said. About why you stayed quiet so long. Daniel exhaled. Let them ask. Eleanor listened from the bed. Are we safe? Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her. Yes. She searched his face. You're sure? He nodded. I wouldn't do this if I wasn't. Night fell again, heavy and humid. The hospital lights glowed against the dark like a ship at sea. Daniel watched Eleanor sleep, then finally allowed himself to close his eyes. He dreamed of corridors, endless ones, doors opening and closing, voices calling his name. When he woke, his phone was buzzing insistently. Unknown number, he answered. Daniel Whittaker. A man's voice responded low and careful. Mr. Whittaker, this is Special Agent Collins. We need to speak. In person. Daniel sat up fully awake now. When tomorrow morning, Collins said. Early. Daniel glanced at Eleanor, still sleeping. I'll be here, Good Collins replied, because what we're uncovering doesn't end at the hospital. The call ended. Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it settling in. This had never been about one building, or one board, or one family. It was about a system that assumed silence meant consent. As dawn crept in once more, Daniel stood, straightened his jacket, and prepared himself for the next layer to peel away. The agents arrived before sunrise, coats dark against the pale marble of the lobby movements, efficient voices low. Daniel watched them from the mezzanine as they checked in with security badges, flashed just long enough to register authority without spectacle. This was not a raid. It was a presence, a reminder that something larger had crossed the line into the open. Special Agent Collins met Daniel near the elevators. Mid-50s, weathered face, the kind of man who had learned to wait longer than most people could tolerate. Mr. Whittaker, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet on short notice. Daniel shook it. I didn't agree. I expected it. Collins gave a thin smile. That tracks. They rode up in silence. The elevator hummed softly, numbers ticking upward. When the doors opened, Collins gestured toward a small conference room, already cleared of papers and personal items. Clean, neutral, deliberate. We won't keep you long, Collins said as they sat. But we need context. Daniel leaned back slightly. Then ask the right questions. Collins opened a folder. Not thick, not thin, balanced. We've identified a network of influence that predates the procurement issues by at least 15 years. Medical suppliers, construction firms, political intermediaries, all operating under the assumption that hospitals were safe places to hide money. Daniel's gaze remained steady. Hospitals are good cover. No one wants to believe corruption lives where people go to heal. Collins nodded. You were adjacent to this network long before the hospital review. Yes. Why didn't you speak up sooner? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought of younger versions of himself. Idealistic, careful, tired. Because timing matters, he said, finally. And because when you speak without leverage, you get buried. Collins studied him. You waited until you had it. I waited until it mattered. Daniel corrected. Collins flipped a page. There's something else. A private foundation. Quiet donations. Back-channel funding for legal defense in unrelated cases. Daniel's jaw tightened. That wasn't me. We know, Collins said. But your name was used. Without your consent. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's new. It's not. Collins replied. It's just visible now. They spoke for nearly an hour. Names surfaced. Patterns emerged. The kind of conversation that peeled back layers without rushing. When Collins finally closed the folder, his expression had shifted. Not accusatory. Respectful. You're going to make enemies, he said. I already have, Daniel replied. Collins stood. We'll be in touch. After he left, Daniel returned to Eleanor's room. She was awake, watching the morning news with the sound muted. Headlines scrolled. Words like investigation and oversight and undisclosed relationships floated by without anchoring to names. You look like someone stole your sleep, she said. Daniel sat beside her. I'll get it back later. She studied his face. They came, didn't they? Yes. And they're thorough. Eleanor nodded. That's good. He hesitated. There's more. This is bigger than we thought. She reached for his hand. It always is. By midday, the hospital shifted again. A recalibration within a recalibration. Security increased. Access tightened. Phones buzzed constantly. Daniel felt the pressure building, not from fear, but from inevitability. Vivian appeared in the doorway, uncertain. May I? She asked. Eleanor nodded. Daniel remained silent. Vivian stepped in, hands clasped. I spoke to our attorneys, she said. They're worried. Daniel's eyes flicked to her. About themselves, she flushed. About exposure. Good, Daniel said. Vivian swallowed. We didn't know. About the hospital. About the donations. About any of it. Daniel looked at her evenly. You didn't ask. Eleanor spoke softly. Vivian. Vivian turned to her sister. I should have stood up for you, she said. For both of you. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Yes, she said. You should have. Vivian's voice cracked. What happens now? Daniel answered. Now you decide who you are without borrowed power. Vivian nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. She left without argument. That afternoon, Daniel stepped outside for the first time in days. The air was thick summer, pressing in early. Reporters waited across the street, cameras poised, but none crossed the line. Not yet. He stood there feeling the sun on his face and realized how long it had been since he'd allowed himself to exist without armor. His phone buzzed. Thomas Reed. Board emergency session scheduled. Pressure mounting. Daniel typed back one word. Fine. Inside, Eleanor slept again, stronger each time she drifted off. Daniel returned to his chair, watching her listening to the steady reassurance of machines doing their job. By evening, another call came, this time from a number he recognized immediately. Old. Buried deep in memory. Daniel, the voice said. Older. Rougher. It's been a long time. Daniel closed his eyes. It has. I hear you're shaking things loose. Things that needed shaking, Daniel replied. A pause. Then, you're going to need allies. Daniel smiled faintly. I already have the right ones. When the call ended, Daniel leaned back, letting the weight of the day settle. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet rewiring underway. Eleanor stirred. You're still here, she murmured. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel said. She smiled, drifting back to sleep. Daniel sat with her as night fell once more. Knowing the next phase was coming, knowing it would test not just his resolve, but his humanity, and ready for the first time to meet it without shrinking. The hearing was scheduled quietly, without press releases or public notice, tucked into a federal building that most people walked past without ever knowing what decisions were made inside. Daniel arrived early as he always did, jacket-pressed expression, composed, carrying nothing but a thin folder, and the weight of weeks that had rearranged his life. The room was smaller than he expected. No flags, no grand seal. Just a long table, a few microphones and faces that had learned to listen without reacting. Eleanor was not there. She was still recovering, still fragile, and Daniel had insisted on that boundary without apology. Special Agent Collins sat against the wall, arms folded. Laura Hensley occupied a seat near the end of the table, posture relaxed, eyes alert. When Daniel entered, she gave a slight nod. Not encouragement. Acknowledgement. "Mr. Whittaker," the chair said, "you understand this is off the record." Daniel sat. "I understand exactly what it is." The questions came slowly at first. Not accusations, invitations. They asked about funding streams, about the years he stayed silent, about the moment he decided to stop. Daniel answered without embellishment. He spoke plainly, choosing clarity over defense. "You could have protected yourself," one of them said. "Why didn't you?" Daniel looked at the man. "Because protection that costs other people their dignity isn't protection. It's theft." There was a pause. Someone made a note. Then the tone shifted. Names surfaced that had not been mentioned before. Institutions Daniel had never touched directly. Political action committees. Consulting firms with no websites. The architecture of influence revealing itself piece by piece. "This isn't about one hospital network," the chair said. "You know that?" Daniel nodded. "I've known it for a while." "Then why start there?" Daniel leaned back slightly. "Because it's where people are most vulnerable, and because it's where lies do the most damage when they're exposed." Silence followed. Heavy. Considered. When the hearing ended, no conclusions were announced, no promises made. Daniel stood, shook hands, and walked out, knowing that what mattered most had already happened. The questions were no longer whether corruption existed. They were how far it reached, and who would be willing to look at it without flinching. Outside, the air was sharp, autumn edging closer. Daniel stood on the steps for a moment, letting the wind cut through the tension in his shoulders. His phone buzzed. "Eleanor," he answered immediately. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone put me back together, slightly crooked," she said. "But alive." He smiled. "That's an improvement." "I heard there was a meeting," she said gently. There was. And Daniel looked up at the sky. "It's moving." She was quiet for a moment. "Come back," she said. "I don't like waking up without you here." "I'm on my way," he replied. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere had changed again. Less fear now, more resolve. Staff moved with purpose, eyes clearer, conversations less guarded. The compliance posters that had once blended into the walls now felt like statements rather than decorations. Daniel entered Eleanor's room to find her sitting up, hair brushed, eyes bright despite the fatigue. She smiled when she saw him. "You look like you argued with the universe and didn't lose," she said. "I didn't win either," Daniel replied, taking her hand. But it listened. She studied his face. "Are you afraid?" He considered the question honestly. "Not of what's coming. Only of becoming someone I don't recognize." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Then keep recognizing yourself." Later that afternoon, Vivian arrived again, this time with no rehearsed speech. She stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of her place. "I brought something," she said, holding out an envelope. Daniel didn't move. Eleanor gestured. "Let her." Vivian handed it over. Inside were copies of emails. Old, uneasy, threads of conversations that hinted at things she hadn't understood at the time. "I went through everything," Vivian said. "All the things I ignored. I thought if I didn't look too closely, it wouldn't be real." Daniel looked at the pages. Why show me now? Vivian's voice shook. Because I don't want to be complicit anymore. Daniel nodded once. That's how it starts. When she left, Eleanor looked at him. Do you trust her? I trust the effort, Daniel said. That's enough for now. As evening fell, the news finally found its footing, not with spectacle but with precision. A senior board member placed on administrative leave, federal inquiries expanding, donor confidence shaken, analysts using words like systemic and entrenched. Daniel watched it on mute, more interested in the way Eleanor leaned back against her pillows, stronger, steadier. You know, she said, I spent years thinking peace meant not making waves. Daniel met her gaze. Peace is choosing which waves are worth riding. A knock interrupted them. Thomas Reed stepped in, face serious. There's a call, he said. For you. Private line. Daniel followed him to the hallway and took the phone. Daniel, the voice said. Familiar. Measured. You're forcing hands. Good, Daniel replied. You're going to be offered something soon, the voice continued. A seat, a title, visibility. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. And I'm calling to advise you not to take it. Daniel smiled faintly. Then we agree. The call ended. He returned to Eleanor's room, feeling lighter, not because the path was easier, but because it was clearer. That night, as Eleanor slept, Daniel sat by the window, city lights stretching out before him. Somewhere in those buildings, people were scrambling, negotiating, rewriting their stories. Somewhere else, nurses were doing quiet work that would never make headlines. Daniel thought of the years he'd spent being underestimated. How comfortable the world had been with that version of him. How dangerous comfort could be. His phone buzzed one last time, a message from Laura Hensley. Tomorrow changes things, Daniel typed back. Then let it. He set the phone down and watched the city until sleep finally found him, knowing that the next morning would not be gentle, but it would be honest, and that was more than enough. The arrests did not happen with sirens or flashing lights. They happened quietly, early in the morning. Men in dark coats stepping into offices before assistants arrived. Papers presented voices lowered out of habit rather than mercy. By the time the news reached the public, the machinery was already moving, irreversible, grinding forward, with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time. Daniel heard about the first one, while Eleanor was eating oatmeal and complaining that the coffee tasted wrong. Too bitter, she said, pushing the cup away. It's like they're punishing me for surviving. He smiled faintly and slid the cup aside. His phone buzzed on the table between them. One name, a single sentence, custody confirmed. He didn't show it to her. Is something wrong? Eleanor asked, watching his face. No, Daniel said. Something's finished. Outside the hospital, the air felt different again. He'd started noticing the shifts now, the way pressure changed before a storm broke. Reporters gathered at the curb, not shouting, not yet, just waiting with the practiced stillness of people who sensed momentum turning in their favor. Daniel walked past them without looking, coat collar turned up, his anonymity finally becoming a choice rather than an assumption. By mid-morning, the second name surfaced, then the third. A resignation letter leaked before it was formally submitted. Stock prices wobbled. Boards convened emergency sessions that stretched into hours, then days. The word systemic appeared in headlines without quotation marks. That was when Daniel knew the story had crossed a threshold. Inside Eleanor's room, sunlight crept across the floor, catching dust motes in slow motion. She rested now, stronger color, returning fully to her face. She watched Daniel pace a familiar rhythm, but there was something different in it. Less restraint, more purpose. You're not hiding it anymore, she said. Daniel stopped. Hiding what that you care, she replied. You used to tuck it away, like it was dangerous. He considered that. It was, he said. When I thought caring meant sacrificing myself. She reached for his hand. And now it means choosing what deserves it. In the afternoon, Special Agent Collins called. No preamble. We're expanding the scope. Daniel leaned against the window, looking out at the river. I assumed you would. There's pressure, Collins continued. From a lot of directions. Daniel said nothing. Collins exhaled. You're becoming a symbol. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I didn't ask for that. No, Collins agreed. But you earned it. After the call, Daniel sat with Eleanor until she fell asleep again. When she did, he left the room for the first time, without checking the monitors twice. He walked down to the chapel on the ground floor, a small, quiet space most people passed without noticing. He sat in the back pew, hands folded, not praying, exactly just allowing himself to be still. He thought of the younger version of himself, the one who'd learned early that silence was safer than confrontation. He thought of the years he'd spent navigating rooms by listening, absorbing, cataloguing, never interrupting. That man had survived. This one was here to do something else. Footsteps echoed softly behind him. He didn't turn. I wondered if I'd find you here, Laura Hensley said, taking a seat beside him. Daniel glanced at her. You don't seem like the chapel type. She smiled thinly. I'm not. But places like this remind people that consequences aren't abstract. They sat in silence for a moment. They're going to offer you a formal role, she said finally. Advisory, oversight, something with a title. Daniel nodded. I know. You could do a lot of good from inside, she said. More than you can from the margins. Daniel looked ahead, eyes unfocused. The margins are where I see best. Hensley studied him. You're serious? Yes. She leaned back. That's going to disappoint some powerful people. It already has, Daniel replied. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, she said, this doesn't happen often. Someone with leverage choosing restraint. Daniel met her gaze. Restraint isn't the absence of action, he said. It's precision. That evening, Eleanor insisted on walking the hallway slow laps with a nurse hovering nearby. Daniel stayed close, matching her pace, his hand hovering near her elbow without touching. You don't need to hover, she teased softly. He smiled. Humor me. As they walked, they passed a television mounted high on the wall. The sound was low, but the caption scrolled clearly. Federal investigation widens. Multiple institutions implicated. Eleanor stopped. She looked up at the screen, then at Daniel. This is because of you. Daniel shook his head. It's because of a lot of people who stayed quiet too long. I just stopped first. She studied him, then nodded. Promise me something else. Anything. When this is over, don't disappear again. He didn't answer immediately. Then I won't, he said, not from myself. Late that night, after Eleanor slept, Daniel returned to the window. The city glowed below, restless, alive, rearranging itself in response to truths it could no longer ignore. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Discreet. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. He knew the tone, the assumption beneath it, that he was still someone who could be summoned. He typed back. No. You need to listen. He set the phone down and exhaled. The next morning would bring more fallout, more offers, more threats dressed up as concern. He was ready for all of it. But for now he stood in the quiet, listening to the steady rhythm of Eleanor's breathing, grounding himself in the reason he'd chosen this path in the first place. Outside, the city waited. Inside, Daniel Whitaker no longer did. The city did not celebrate when the final filings were made. There were no parades, no speeches on courthouse steps, no sense of victory that could be photographed and framed. There was only a quiet shift, the kind that happens when something heavy is finally moved and the ground underneath is allowed to settle. Daniel stood at the window of Eleanor's hospital room as the last of the autumn light slipped between buildings. She was sitting up now, wrapped in a cardigan. He recognized the one she wore on long Sunday mornings when they had nowhere to be. Her strength had returned in increments, a few steps more each day, a little less pain, a little more color, life inching forward. They closed the case, she said softly, watching his reflection in the glass. The nurse told me. Daniel nodded. They closed this part of it. She smiled faintly. You never did like neat endings. He turned and sat beside her. Neat endings are for stories that don't care what happens next. Outside the hospital, the news cycle had already begun to move on. Another scandal, rising to replace the last. Names that had once commanded rooms, now spoken carefully, sometimes not at all. Institutions issuing statements about reform, about lessons learned, about commitments to transparency. Some of it was real. Some of it was rehearsal. Daniel understood the difference better than most. He had declined every formal offer, advisory roles, oversight committees, positions that came with press releases and carefully curated authority. He said no without anger, without drama, without apology. He had not fought to be visible just to become decorative. Instead, he returned to the life that had been paused, but never abandoned. 3 weeks after Eleanor was discharged, Daniel walked back into his office for the first time since the hearing. The door still creaked the same way. The desk bore the same scuffs along the edge. Nothing had changed, and everything had. Colleagues greeted him with something like awe, something like hesitation. He met it with the same calm he always had. No stories, no explanations, just presence. At lunch, a younger staff member approached him in the hallway, nervous, earnest. Mr. Whitaker, she said, I just wanted to say thank you for reminding people that this place matters. Daniel smiled. It always did, he said. People just forget. The foundation work continued quietly. Funds redirected where they were meant to go. Equipment orders fulfilled without middlemen. Programs that had stalled for years restarted with startling efficiency once the weight was lifted. No headlines followed those changes. That was fine with Daniel. Results did not need witnesses. At home, life reassembled itself slowly. Eleanor tired easily at first, then less so. They relearned the rhythm of mornings. Coffee poured carefully. News read selectively. Silence no longer tense, but companionable. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on, Eleanor spoke without looking at him. I spent a long time thinking peace meant avoiding conflict. Daniel nodded. Most people do. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would stay intact, she continued. I didn't realize how much I was shrinking to make that possible. He reached for her hand. You're not doing that anymore. She squeezed his fingers. Neither are you. Some relationships did not survive the shift. Vivian called once then, not again. Margaret sent a letter, handwritten, careful heavy with regret. Daniel read it once, folded it and placed it in a drawer. Not forgiven. Not rejected. Simply acknowledged. Others emerged quietly. Old colleagues, community leaders who had watched from the edges, waiting to see if the change would hold. Daniel met with them on his terms. Small rooms, clear agendas, no performances. One afternoon, Laura Hensley stopped by, unannounced. She stood in his doorway coat, draped over her arm, expression neutral. "You were right," she said. "It didn't end where we thought it would." Daniel gestured for her to sit. "It never does." She studied him. "You could have taken more credit." Daniel shook his head. "Credit is a form of debt. Someone always comes to collect." She smiled at that. "You've changed the way some people think." Maybe he said, or maybe they were ready to think differently and needed an excuse. As winter approached, Daniel found himself walking more, through neighborhoods he'd known for years, past buildings that had once felt imposing and now felt merely human. He noticed things he had missed before, the way the city carried on regardless of who thought they owned it. One night, as snow began to fall, Eleanor joined him on the couch, resting her head against his shoulder. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, how exposed we became. Daniel thought of the years before, the careful silences, the calculated patience, the cost of being unseen. "No," he said. "I regret waiting as long as I did." She nodded, understanding. The final report was released in late December. Thorough, unforgiving. Names printed in black and white. Recommendations issued. Consequences outlined. Daniel read it once, then closed the file and didn't open it again. The work was done. Not finished, never finished, but done enough. On the first morning of the new year, Daniel stood at the same window, where this chapter of his life had begun, watching the city wake under a pale winter sun. He felt no triumph, no hunger, just a steady certainty that he no longer needed permission to exist as he was. Eleanor joined him, slipping her arm through his. "Ready?" she said. He nodded. Always. The story did not end with applause. It ended with continuity, with people doing their jobs better, with systems slightly less broken than before, with a man who had spent a lifetime being underestimated, choosing not to disappear again. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words: your voice matters.